There is a moment that most of us have lived through, but very few of us ever talk about out loud. It is that moment when you're sitting somewhere, maybe in your car in a parking lot, maybe on the floor of your bathroom, maybe just staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m, and you realize with kind of quiet devastation that you have nothing left, not a reserve tank, not a backup plan, not even enough energy to pretend anymore. The mask is off, the performance is over, and what is left is just you, hollowed out and honest, finally too tired to keep up the act. Most people experience that moment as a failure, as evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with them, as proof that they are not built for the life they are trying to live. And so they do what the world has trained them to do. They rest just long enough to gather a little strength back, and then they put the mask on again and go back out there and try harder, push further, perform better, white-knuckle their way through another season, telling themselves that this time they will be strong enough to make it without cracking. But what if that moment on the floor is not a failure? What if it is actually an invitation? There was a man named Paul who understood pressure in a way that most of us will never fully comprehend. This was not a man who lived a sheltered or comfortable life. He had been beaten with rods on multiple occasions. He had been shipwrecked 3 times, including once where he spent an entire day and night adrift in the open ocean. He had been in danger from rivers, from bandits, from his own countrymen, from Gentiles in cities, in the wilderness. He had gone without sleep, without food, without water. He had experienced cold and exposure, and every conceivable form of hardship that the ancient world had to offer. And through all of that, Paul had learned something about endurance. He had developed a kind of spiritual toughness that is almost impossible to comprehend from the outside. He had learned to press on. He had learned to keep going when the circumstances were brutal, and the opposition was fierce, and the cost was extraordinarily high. By every measure of the ancient world, Paul was a strong man, a resilient man, a man who had been to the fire multiple times and had come out the other side still standing. So when Paul talks about weakness, he is not talking about the weakness of someone who has never been tested. He is talking about something that hit him in the middle of all that strength, something that got underneath his armor and would not leave. He calls a thorn in his flesh. He does not tell us exactly what it was. And maybe that is intentional, because the ambiguity means that all of us can insert our own thorn into that space. Whatever it was significant enough that Paul considered a torment. It was significant enough that he went to God about it not once, not twice, but 3 separate times with the same desperate request. Please take this away from me. Think about what it means to pray the same prayer 3 times. Think about the persistence that requires. Think about what it says about how much that thorn was affecting him. This was not a passing complaint. This was Paul laying himself prostrate before God and saying, I cannot keep going like this. This thing is breaking me. I am asking you. I am begging you. Please remove it. And God said no, not a distant or cold no, not an indifferent or dismissive no, but a no that came wrapped in one of the most profound and counterintuitive promises in the entire Bible. God said to Paul, and God is saying to you right now through these very words, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Read that slowly. Let it actually land. My power is made perfect in weakness. Not my power is made perfect despite weakness. Not my power will eventually overcome your weakness so that you can finally be strong. Not my power will show up once you get your act together and stop being so limited. No. My power is made perfect in weakness. In it, inside of it, the weakness itself is the environment where something divine starts to happen. This does not make sense by the world's logic. We do not live in a culture that respects weakness. We live in a culture that monetizes strength, that celebrates hustle and grit and the grinding refusal to quit, that turns people who overcame massive obstacles into icons, not people who sat with their limitations and admitted they could not fix themselves. The message we absorb from the time we are very young is that weakness is something to be eliminated as quickly as possible. You acknowledge it briefly, maybe, and then you work on it. You improve. You grow. You become the person who is no longer weak in that area. And personal growth is not a bad thing. But there's a category of weakness that is not meant to be fixed. There's a category of limitation that God has allowed to remain in your life not because he forgot about it, or because he lacks the power to remove it, but because he has a different plan for it. Because he knows that your self-sufficiency, left unchecked, will keep you at a comfortable distance from total dependence on him. And total dependence on him is where the real power lives. Here is what we do not often say in church, but desperately need to hear. Many of us have been using God as a supplement. We bring him in to help at the places where our own strength falls short. And then when things stabilize, we go back to running on our own. We pray hardest when things are hardest. We lean in when we are desperate and gradually lean back out as we regain our footing. And God, in his deep love for us, sometimes allows a thorn to remain in our flesh specifically because he knows it will keep us coming back. It will keep us close. It will keep us in the posture of receiving rather than performing. That is not cruelty. That is intimate, specific, intentional love. Think about a vine and a branch. Jesus used that image deliberately. A branch does not occasionally connect to the vine when it needs a boost. A branch is in constant, unbroken connection to the vine because that connection is the only reason it can produce anything at all. Cut off from a vine, it does not slow down. It dies. It simply cannot function independently. And that is the picture of what we are designed to be in our relationship with God. Not self-contained units that occasionally plug in for a recharge, but branches are utterly and completely dependent on the source of life that flows through the vine. Your weakness is not keeping you from that kind of connection. Your weakness, when you stop fighting it and start surrendering it, is actually the very thing that drives you toward it. Paul says something remarkable after he receives God's answer. He does not say, well, I suppose I will reluctantly accept this. He says, therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. There is joy in that statement. There is freedom. There is a man who has been completely liberated from the exhausting burden of having to be enough. That phrase, so that Christ's power may rest on me, deserves to sit with you for a moment. The word for rest there carries the image of a tent or a tabernacle being pitched. It is not a passing through. It is not a brief visitation. It is a settling in, a dwelling. The power of Christ does not breeze past us in our weakness. When we surrender, it moves in. So what does that mean practically? What does it actually look like to stop straining and start surrendering? It starts with honesty. Real honesty. Not the kind you perform for an audience, but the kind you practice when it is just you and God and the silence. The kind where you stop saying, I am fine, or I am trusting the process, or God is working it all out, when on the inside you are terrified and exhausted and genuinely not okay. Surrender starts with telling the truth. It starts with saying out loud to the God who already knows that you are not enough for what is in front of you, that you have run out, that you are desperately in need of something that you cannot manufacture on your own. There's something about saying that out loud that breaks a particular kind of pride. The pride that insists you should be able to handle more than you are handling. The pride that compares your inner life to other people's outer performance and concludes that you are the only one struggling this badly. The pride that would rather exhaust itself into collapse than admit to anyone, including God, that it needs help. When you break that open, something shifts. It is not always dramatic. It does not always feel like a lightning bolt or a sudden infusion of supernatural energy. Sometimes it feels quieter than that, like a weight that was pressing down on your chest has been lifted slightly, like you can breathe again, like you are no longer alone in it. And then, slowly you start to notice things. You start to notice that you made it through something you genuinely did not think you could survive. You start to notice that words came out of your mouth that you do not think you had in you. You start to notice that your patience in a situation where you had every natural reason to fall apart was somehow still holding. You start to notice that something is carrying you that is not your own will or your own determination, that is Christ's power resting on you. That is what Paul was talking about. Not the absence of struggle, but the unmistakable presence of something greater than yourself showing up inside of it. And this is important. It is not just about getting through hard seasons. This is about what God is building in you through the experience of genuine dependence. Because the person who has been carried through something they could not carry themselves is not the same person they were before. They carry a testimony in their body. They carry a knowledge of God that cannot be acquired through study alone. They know in a way that goes deeper than intellect that he is faithful, that he is near, that he is powerful, and that his grace is not just a concept, but a living reality that showed up for them when nothing else could. That knowledge changes how you pray. It changes how you lead. It changes how you love people who are in the middle of their own falling apart. Because you've been there, and you know what it means to be held. It changes your worship because you're not just singing words about a God you believe to exist, but songs to a God whose faithfulness you have personally witnessed in your most desperate place. The weakness was not wasted. It was formative. It was refining you into someone who carries a specific kind of grace that only comes from having needed it absolutely. There's someone reading this right now who is in the middle of something they cannot fix. Maybe it is a relationship that is fracturing no matter what they try. Maybe it is a health situation that is not resolving the way they prayed it would. Maybe it is a battle in their mind that comes back regardless of how hard they fight it. Maybe it is a grief that will not lift. Maybe it is a calling that feels too large for the person they currently are. Maybe it is simply the accumulated exhaustion of a season that has asked too much for too long and given back too little. To that person, I want to say this as directly and gently as I know how. You are not disqualified. You are not being punished. You are not forgotten. And the weakness you are ashamed of, the limitation you keep apologizing for, the thorn you have begged God to remove. It is not the end of your story. It may be the most important part of it. God is not standing at a distance waiting for you to get stronger before he comes close. He is already close. He has been close this entire time. And he is not looking at your emptiness with disappointment. He is looking at it with the knowledge of what he is about to do in it, through it, and because of it. You were never meant to be strong enough on your own. That was never the design. The design was dependence. The design was a branch so connected to its vine that it could not imagine trying to bear fruit without it. The design was a life so surrendered that when things happened that defied natural explanation, no one was confused about where the power was coming from. Let go of the need to have it all together. Let go of the performance. Let go of the exhausting management of appearances. Let the weakness be seen, first by God, and then by whatever trusted few he places in your life to walk with you through it. His grace is sufficient. That is not a motivational phrase. That is a promise that has been tested in the hardest circumstances imaginable and found to be absolutely, unshakably true. It was sufficient for Paul in prison. It was sufficient in shipwrecks and beatings and rejection and loneliness and thorns that would not leave. It is sufficient for what you are carrying today.